to say migration closing conference. I just had a chat to earlier. Said, I better call the event something. I don't know, sort of thought all the effort's gone into the content, maybe not the names. Anyway, something I must mention before we get going. And did you enjoy any of the fine cakes and muffins in the cafe area? They were very good. Actually, I'm lying, I didn't have one. They look very good. But I must say, an organisation called Luminary, a social enterprise designed for opportunities for women who experience social or economic disadvantage to build a better future for themselves. So you need to go to luminarybakery.com for all your future catering requirements. There you go. It's leaflets out there, I'm sure. It's a hard sell, you know. That's good. Anyway, but seriously, welcome. I'm not going to talk for long. I'm Alex Fraser. I'm the Director of Refugee Support, Restoring Family Links, Anti-Trafficking, Mental Health and Psychosocial Support for the British Red Cross. And I wasn't really necessarily going to speak here today, but I've been asked to, so here I am. I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of the things I think are quite important to this work that's ongoing for us and for everyone in this room. I think everyone's here for a reason, because you've all got this intent to drive change, improvement, and learn from each other. There's some people who still aren't in the room, but hopefully they'll turn up at some point. I'm sure they will, so these empty seats will get filled. But thank you so much for taking time out from what I know very busy lives that you have personally in terms of work and everything else. Very grateful to you all. Now I've worked with the Red Cross for quite a long time, and in that time I've been very fortunate in many ways to meet a lot of people who are in a lot of different situations here and in other countries. And through that, I've seen some really great things. I've also seen some things that are very wrong, things that really trouble me, and it goes up to right today, last week. There's barely been a week goes by where I don't meet someone who doesn't seem to be living in a situation that's very unjust and very difficult. They are living in a situation that's very unjust and very difficult. And often it isn't even because the policy's not there to change their situations, because there's other things that aren't there. There's barriers that are there. And I think particularly when I meet women in those situations who have had an extraordinary amount of time experiencing terrible things, from maybe a point somewhere else in the world, through some kind of journey, maybe with points in between, ending up here in the United Kingdom. And I suppose what's particularly terrible is the number of women who continue to experience danger, violence, and live with fear, even though that's something that they shouldn't be living with. And today is an opportunity, really, for us to come together, to continue to do something about that. I know a lot of you work very closely in this work. A lot of you, some of you, I know, have experienced this yourself in terms of your own lived experience. So that kind of goes back to the point of me feeling, I hope, a healthy level of uncomfortableness standing up here as a man. That doesn't escape that fact. And it's in a way, great to have some more men in the room as well today. I think, men in particular need to do a quite steep learning curve when it comes to lots of the things we'll be talking about through today. So yeah, it's good that we're here. I think there is lots we can continue to do to drive change in terms of the conditions here in the United Kingdom, to ensure that safety and dignity are not things that are out of reach for people, as they so often are. And I'm going to hear a lot about that today. And to share experience and to connect and to learn and rethink some of our approaches. Hopefully, I know we've got some of our own British Red Cross caseworkers here, to sort of use this as an opportunity to sort of refuel your minds away. So we go with some fresh ideas and insights. The scale of the challenge is huge. Globally, it's mammoth. How do you get your head around? So we have to try and think about how we bring that into a way for us to think about how we can at least do something about the things in front of us and the things that we can connect to. And there are lots of barriers in the way. Some of them are to do with policy, but some are to do with fear, to do with resources, to do with quite practical things. And we can certainly continue to do a lot about that through the way we go about our work and connect with others. But although the challenge is big, I know certainly for all the women I know from the Red Cross and the women I meet when I go out and about, we're not short on passion, we're not short on energy, we're not short on ambition, and that really puts us in a strong position, I think, to try and drive the change that we need. But it is going to take a collective effort. And there's a collective responsibility. I feel the responsibility. It's a collective responsibility between us, especially people like me who are in a very privileged position, to try and distribute the power so that this does become more of a truly collective effort. And it isn't just about, words. I can stand up here and say all kinds of stuff, but critically it's about action. I mean, I'm in a relatively senior position in the British Red Cross, so I have to really think about that, and the actions I take really will have an impact on the work that we do. But some of that isn't just about saying, well, isn't that? It's about who I bring together. Being much more deliberate about that. Who I manage to be in a position where they can be more involved. I increasingly see that as my job. Not for me to be in the room, but to make sure others are in the room. That's increasingly really important to me. Because we're going to have to be deliberate in our actions, and it isn't just about us individuals. We've got to think about organisations who perhaps are quite small in size, but massive in terms of experience, massive in terms of expertise. There are incredible organisations who are, led by women, who are for women, for women who are migrants or refugees, and we have to make sure, certainly the British Red Cross, we're absolutely connected to those organisations. We will be so much more strong as a result. What we have in our favour as British Red Cross, we have huge scale, we have an incredibly well-known brand, we have a lot of opportunities to get in the room with decision makers and policy makers. So we need to really connect to people who maybe won't have an opportunity to be in the room, don't have the resources that we have. And that strengthens us, but it strengthens us all, I think. We're just launching a new strategy as the British Red Cross, and really at the centre of that strategy, it's very different to the way we've seen the world as an organisation before. We've stopped talking about the services we provide, it's more about the issues that are going on in the world and what we need to do about them. And it really isn't what the British Red Cross needs to do about them. It's the part we can play in bringing people together in whatever way that means. It could be bringing people together to leave a funding, it could be bringing people together to share experience, it could be bringing people together because we know the voice of someone who's living this right now will get the policy change over the line. So we're thinking differently as a result, and we need to be challenged in our thinking as we move along. At that point on conditions, there are things that must, there are things every day you see that must just drive you nuts. You think, why on earth is that happening? Why is that not happening as it should? Central to the SWIM program, to the work that I think we all do, is the sort of simple term that women who are experiencing gender-based violence are not alone. But I can see why it might not feel that way. And if someone is taking that step to even think about coming out of a situation that's intolerable, I think we talk about how brave that is, but being brave does not mean that there isn't fear. I can't imagine what that's like, being in a situation where actually the thing stopping you from leaving it is fear. But when someone takes that step, when a woman takes that step, what is totally unacceptable is that they come out of one situation which is terrible, and then move into a different situation which is terrible. Situations of destitution, of exploitation, fear, homelessness, different risks, but still hugely at risk. We can do something about that. Last week I was in Rotherham, and I met these two amazing women who are volunteering for us. But they told me about just, the sort of stuff they were talking about in terms of what their situation was like, the fact that they're still waiting on decisions, they're still waiting on support, they're still waiting on so many things. Why are they waiting so long? That whole time, totally disempowered, unable to be independent, unable to get the support they need, whether it's health, financial support, living in secure accommodation. That is not going to help their situation. So it's not going to encourage people who are unable to come forward during those difficult situations. So we've got to continue to think about how we change that. Last week, Stefan was here actually, we were talking about a case that we're dealing with in London, where somebody who was in a situation of domestic violence was about to take that really brave step of leaving that situation. But the challenge we were facing was we could not get the things in place that needed to be in place to enable that to happen safely. And yet when you speak to the people whose responsibility it is, we have shared responsibility, but statutory responsibility, they will say, yes, this should happen, that should happen, but it wasn't happening. You know, so how do we make sure that things do connect to the way they need to on the day that they need to, and it doesn't take 2 days, 3 days, a week, 1 month, you know? That is not going to help anything, it's not going to help anyone. So there is lots of challenges, you know, but there's also some great practice, you know, and I think we'll be talking a lot about that today, and it's right, isn't it? We're talking about good examples of things we've been doing, develop capability through programs like SWIM, Safe Women in Migration, if you know what it stands for, and to develop the capability, you know, and enabling women to know what their rights are. So important. You know, I was reading a lot of the feedback from the work we've done with the Know Your Rights sessions, and people, that could be the first time someone's known that they had a right. They didn't realise they had that right. You know, so you know you've got the right, let's help people to exercise that right. You know, but going back to the point of being deliberate on our actions, so, you know, at Red Cross, and I know it's the same in other organisations, we've been very deliberate about developing the capability of our people. You know, that we're on a journey with that. You know, the job is never done on that. Partly because things continue to change, but the job is never done. We have new people who join us. We need to make sure that our workforce is always developing its capability, so we can be responsive in the way that we go about things, so we do no harm through our work, so we can make the connections right the first time. We also have to think about our policy work, and I know we're going to talk about that through today. Again, being very deliberate about empowering and enabling and making it safe for women to be at the heart of that work around how we fund influence policy in our communication. And that links to something that for me, having worked for this organisation for 18 years, has been absolutely game-changing how we approach everything. And that's the development of our Voices Network. You know, it's amazing to have some women from our Voices Network here today. You know, it's just brilliant to have you in the room and you know, you're going to be upfront and central in a moment. But that for me is like night and day. You know, and we have to make it very deliberate that we don't approach anything without thinking about who needs to be in that discussion. You know, we've come a long way. I know there's people who are in the Red Cross now, there's people who were in the Red Cross some years ago. And it wasn't that long ago when I would find myself in a room with people who look a bit like me having a conversation about other people. You know, that is not going to lead to the best outcome. You know, so as I say, my job is to look around the room and say, well, hold on a minute, why are we not got the right people in the room? It's not about rank or role, it's about who the people are that can give us the right perspective. You know, making it safe for people to feel they can be in that situation too. When I was in Sheffield, I was in Rotherham and Sheffield last week. We had a really great discussion. Rad was there actually about some of those things. About you know how we someone like me, I will not see the world through someone else's eyes. You know, so I need to make sure those eyes are in the room. Otherwise, we will not be as effective as we can be. You know, we're in a position as the British Red Cross that we can perhaps make some of these things happen more easily because we've got the resource, we've got the capability. Going back to that point that some of these amazing organisations that are led by and run for women, you know, how do we help those organisations to be part of that, where resources is so scarce? You know, that's the main barrier for those organisations to just thrive even more than they are now, you know. You know, and it's about continuing to learn from each other as well, you know, and I almost daily learn from all kinds of people across this organisation, the women I meet, the women I work with, you know, and I have to really take that on board and be willing to change things, even things that feel quite set in stone, because if it's the right thing to do, it's the right thing to do, you know, and I think we have to be seen to be taking some bold changes so that actually we get to a point where things are different and ultimately the experience for women is better, so much better than it is today, you know. So I think I've said enough. Now time for this old middle-class, white-bearded male to stop and hand over to some of the incredible, amazing, powerful women who really make the organisation what it is. So I want to say thank you. Have a great day. Brilliant to be here. Over to you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, of course.
Very excellent. Thank you very much for setting out the scene so well. So welcome everyone. My name is Ellie Shepherd. I'm the UK Development Manager for Refugee Support, Restoring Family Links. But for the duration of this programme, I was sort of managing the project. So I've been asked to come back and talk to you a bit today. So the purpose of today is to really share some of the learning from Safe Women Migration and the last couple of years of delivering. And the structure is, you'll hear a little bit from us, but also we want to hear from you. So we've built some time in just for a bit of a kind of question and answer. So please do think of questions and engage, because although this is going to be the end of our funded project, we're also seeing it as an opportunity to kind of continue engagement on sort of gender-based violence issues. So please, do take the space to participate and ask questions. So I suppose before, and also we're going to hear from our Voices Network as well, so I'm not going to be too long and I'm going to hand over to them shortly. But I guess before talking specifically about the project, we have the slide. I think everybody in the room today knows what gender-based violence is, but again, just setting the scene a little bit. The Safe Women and Migration Project aim to strengthen protection against gender-based violence and all these different types of GBV, specifically for women in the asylum process, migrant women, and women with refugee status who travel into Europe. So that's the overall aim of this project. It was a 2-year project funded by the European Commission in partnership with 5 other European countries. So I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. But just thought it was also worth kind of taking a step back, because I know the Red Cross are known for many things, but we haven't really spoken out about gender-based violence until now. So this is slightly newer for us, and we'll hear towards the end about some of our policy and advocacy work that we're now starting to do and speak more publicly. So just a little bit of background to the Red Cross. As I'm sure you know, we are an international humanitarian movement working in sort of protracted conflict, disaster, emergency, displacement, and then increasingly across migration trails. 2015 was quite a big moment when it comes to gender-based violence, because we, at our international conference, passed a resolution that specifically looked at SGBV. And what that did was gave all Red Cross national societies a mandate to work on gender-based violence, as they saw it as an increasingly important issue. I think we were quite late on that one compared to other international organisations. But 2015 was a big moment. So all national societies now have it as high priority to work on SGBV in whatever capacity they're working in on the ground in any of these areas. So to forward that, we've set up a number of kind of international working groups to share best practice across different national societies. And for example, the ICRC in protracted conflict settings now takes like a reverse burden of proof. So always assume that sexual gender-based violence is happening rather than waiting for it to be brought to our attention. So I think in the British Red Cross, we've kind of tried to build upon that as well. So with a lot of the work that we do, we're taking that reverse burden of proof approach. So we're kind of assuming that things are happening. We're not going to wait necessarily for people to disclose to us. We're starting to think about how we design our services to make sure they're safe, making sure that our people have the capacity to respond. So we're always alert and we can identify and respond rather than waiting. And the work of our international directorate in the Red Cross is also around building the capacity of other national societies. So just a word on what we do in the UK. You're probably aware that we are the largest provider for people seeking asylum, non-statutory, so we're not funded or independent, but we provide support to, I think it's about 36,000 individuals every year, going through that asylum process, people with status, people at the end of process, and also undocumented migrants who are vulnerable. So our reach and scale means that we have been working with people affected by gender-based violence for many years, but we haven't until now had a very, very specific project looking at bringing all of that learning together and building our own capacity. So through our, we call them Women in Crisis Services, we opened the first one in London in 2002, and they were really to respond to GBV, providing a very kind of holistic casework support for women who are coming into our services. But we've never had kind of funding to develop that. So it's almost part of our kind of business as usual, providing complex casework, destitution support, all of our services. We do a range of things, including family reunion and resettlement. We provide support through our anti-trafficking service to young refugees, and as I say, complex casework and work with people who are at the end of the process, who refuse protection but remain in the UK. And I think again last year we provided support to 16,000 people who were destitute in the UK, and about a third of those are women. So through all of those services, we do a lot of work with people who are affected by gender-based violence. So again, I think everybody in the room is kind of aware of some of these things, but just in terms of, why Safe Women Migration? Why did we seek out some funding to develop what we're doing? Some of the barriers that migrant, refugee, and women seeking asylum face are structural and systematic around lack of funding. And again, those from the sector in the room, this is no surprise to you, but particularly around underfunded specialist services. So frequently we see, women who, I think as Alex mentioned, want to leave an abusive or violent situation, but they literally have nowhere to go. There's no accommodation that will accept them. Services are not equipped, be that around, language needs, basic things like interpreters. So frequently we see people returning to very violent, abusive, dangerous situations. Lack of safe reporting, and again, we're going to touch on this at the end when we talk about policy work. But as you may be aware, there is kind of data sharing in place between kind of police and other statutory services for the purposes of immigration enforcement. So again, the women that we support tell us that they are very aware of this, and it does act as a barrier, particularly if they're undocumented in the UK, because they know that if they go and make a report of sexual violence to the police and they're undocumented in the UK, there's a likelihood that they may be questioned around their immigration status. In extreme cases, maybe even detained and face removal from the UK for reporting abuse against them. So this is well known in communities, and it's well known by people who wish to perpetrate harm and abuse as well as a method of control. And there's a lot that's been said about this in the sector, but I think what we're trying to bring is the voice of the women who come to our services. And again, this is something that they tell us a lot that keeps them in abusive situations. So one of the things we did when we started this project was to kind of review what was happening within Red Cross services. As I said, our reach and our scale is huge, but we really wanted to find out the scale of SGBV and how we were responding. So we did a report about 6 months in, just to inform people like Alex, who maybe it wasn't on their radar 2 years ago, and kind of senior managers in the Red Cross that they should be focusing and investing in this more. And what we found is that we were very much bridging that gap between the specialist services potentially, but also the refugee migrant sector, that there was that gap there. So one service manager told me, we're not kind of specialist providers of domestic abuse services, nor are we trying to be. But we tend to kind of keep hold of these very complex, very difficult cases because we would want to refer them on, but there's nowhere to refer to, particularly in some of the regions that we work in. We work in every region of the UK. So we quite quickly realised that if we are going to be working with these high risk, very complex issues, we need to be properly trained. It's not, we need to make sure that we have that basic level of training and awareness, that we're not doing harm, but also that we're developing things like effective referral mechanisms so we can refer into services, but also thinking about how we can build capacity, not just of ourselves, but of the wider sector as well. So the overarching aim, as I said, is to strengthen protections, but these are 3 project aims that everything else has stemmed from. So that kind of phrase capacity building, we'll probably talk about a lot today. So building the capacity of frontline professionals to respond. So as I mentioned at the start, the Safe Border Migration was a partnership programme with Italy, France, Romania and Sweden, so a mixture of Red Cross and non-Red Cross. It was focused on the asylum reception system, which in Europe looks quite different from the UK. So our partner agencies are working in a context where you have these kind of big reception centres, and then services are provided within them. So within those centres, you might have health professionals, legal professionals, but people maybe not with a good understanding of survivor-centred approach and these other good practices that we would use when working with survivors. So that's the context they were working in. So building capacity of those first responders to really have the basics in place. I'll talk about that in a second. Secondly, so raising awareness amongst women and girls of rights to protection, access to safety, support and justice. So again, this came from what women were telling us, that they just didn't have the information that they needed. So we'll hear a bit more about those workshops that we developed to address that need. And thirdly, advocacy, so increased protection for all, regardless of immigration status. So I call them products, but things we produce. throughout the project. And then some of them hopefully you've seen outside that we can share with you today. So the training toolkit for professionals. So this was a 2-day training that we developed. And as I said, in the UK, we kind of focus very much on building the capacity of our own staff, given our reach and the fact that we're providing support to people at all stages of the process. We developed a training toolkit. There's a lot of training toolkits out there on SGBV, particularly at international level. We're kind of overrun with toolkits. I think that's often the solution to a problem, like let's make a toolkit. So we were quite conscious we didn't want to duplicate what was already out there. So I think the way that this is different is very much aimed at people working within that asylum system. So we're drawn on the international frameworks, but making it very applicable, particularly for the UK context. Secondly, the Know Your Rights workshop toolkit. So we'll hear a bit more from voices around how that was developed. But this is essentially like a workshop plan that anybody working kind of within that sector can use to facilitate information sessions for migrant women. And we've produced a load of flyers, brochures, and posters that you've seen out there, again in different languages, that will be put throughout all of the Red Cross offices throughout the UK and kind of partners and statutory services. Minimum standards. So this is the advocacy point. So we developed at EU level some minimum standards that we, through our project work, think that anybody working in the asylum reception system should adhere to. And then we also adapted those for the UK context, thinking about what partners are doing in the sector as well and drawing from some of their expertise. So not from scratch, very much building on what was already there. And then finally, domestic abuse protocol for our staff. So I mentioned that we kind of find ourselves bridging the gap often, working with what are actually quite high risk domestic abuse cases for want of services to refer on to. So part of our capacity building alongside training our staff was to develop some really quite detailed operational guidance, but again, drawing on the expertise that's already there, getting that checked with second sector experts to make sure that we have that kind of safe underpinning for the work that we're doing. And yeah, I suppose just a word on our approach. You know, I've mentioned that we don't consider ourselves to be experts in gender-based violence, you know, by any means. So very much, I think our approach has been working with the sector, using insights from our own work, but listening to the women who access our services and to those caseworkers who've been supporting them. So we've been working, I suppose, in this space for over 15 years, but you know, bringing those insights together. So co-production, working with our Voices network to develop some of the materials, both content and approach. So making sure that that was done jointly. Understanding our role within the women's sector, domestic abuse sector, but also kind of the migrant sector as well. Learning from existing expertise and building on what the sector already knows. For example, Step Up Migrant Women campaign, making sure that we were able to lend our voice using our own kind of operational evidence and expertise. And again, working within that kind of wider Red Cross movement and mandate that we have from the movement to work on SGBV. Here are some of our products. So yeah, just a word on the sort of capacity building activities. So to make sure we got this right, we used a kind of questionnaire approach throughout all of our partners across Europe. So around 600 people working very much in frontline services with women who'd travelled to Europe and were in the asylum system of whichever country that was. And some of the insights from those survey responses from all these professionals really told us that there was a lack of awareness. Often domestic abuse, when it was within families, was seen as a private matter, something that professionals didn't really want to get involved in. And I heard that as well from accommodation providers in the UK that I went out and spoke to, that it was very much, you know, private matter, which was quite surprising actually, because that's something that we were used to hearing, you know, in the past from statutory services. But I think when it came to migrant families or refugee families, it was still seen as this is private or it's cultural, even worse. So there was a real kind of barrier there to even identifying before they could offer support and make appropriate referrals. Referral pathways, again, was another really big one. So making sure referral pathways were placed. So we came across a lot of practice where people were just kind of Googling for services and sending people on their way. So signposting rather than referral. And also how people respond. So that whole kind of survivor-centered approach, putting the person's wishes at the center of any response, was lacking as well. Having a true understanding about confidentiality and making sure services could be accessed in a way that didn't discriminate based on immigration status. So these are some of the things that we wanted to put into the training that we developed. So we developed a number of modules at EU level. So understanding, very much introduction to SGBV, rights and laws in each of the country. So we needed to educate the professionals on what was available as well. The impact of GBV, to give them that insight into why it was so important that people are properly protected. Survivor-centered approach and safe referral pathways. So this is a 2-day training. It's quite lengthy. There's a lot of detail in there. So in the UK, we trained 140 of our own staff through this training, and also started the process of kind of reaching out to accommodation providers. So Mears and Belfast, we went over and trained them, which was really interesting. I mean, some of their feedback, as I said, when we started, they were kind of saying, we don't see any gender, show them the list, explain what gender-based violence is. No, we don't see any of that. So they said it was completely, they didn't have those types of issues. But by the end, they were kind of recognising, oh, okay, actually we see a lot of gender-based violence indicators, but they just haven't been acting on them. Being the Red Cross as well, we took a very kind of psychosocial approach. So we wove in psychosocial approaches and support throughout all of the training and good practice in responding. So, yeah, know your rights. This was a workshop that we developed. As I said, it's very much designed to provide information on a range of topics. When we started, we didn't really have a strong idea of what those topics would be. So we made sure to consult and work with a kind of co-production approach with people within our own organisation, but also externally, to make sure that we were getting that right. So we developed the workshops and kind of delivered them. Our approach was via our existing women's support groups around the UK, and one organisation that was external, Refugee Women Connect up in Liverpool. And we ensured that if it was us delivering, our kind of co-deliverer was either a kind of participant or a facilitator of that group, with, to make sure that we were kind of embedding it within the groups as well. I will hand over now to talk a little bit more about the development process of the Know Your Rights workshops, and then maybe come back and just summarise some of the learning. So I invite Voices ladies up to the stage.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Before I hand over to our Voices Ambassador, Amanda and Saki, I might just give a brief overview of the Voices Network. So I am Lila. I work for Red Cross based in Glasgow, and I work with the Voices Network across Scotland, England and Wales. So the Voices Network is now a 250 member strong collective of refugees and people seeking asylum who share some of their experience with a view to change minds, change policy and change practice. So that may be through, in order to change minds, engage with host communities and also with the media to promote more fair and balanced portrayals, changing policy, so engaging in advocacy campaigns. And Magda and Saki wanted me to share with you the immigration policy win. So for the past few months, the group has been lobbying the Scottish Government and members of the Scottish Parliament very hard, and have been speaking in Holyrood as well. And over 2 weeks ago, they voted to extend voting rights and candidacy rights to refugees. So we're very proud of that achievement and being part of that. And then thirdly, to change practice, so the Voices Network engaged in co-production, work with the British Red Cross to make our services more accessible, more effective. So yeah, so please welcome Amanda and Saki to speak a little bit more.
Well, thanks a lot for giving us the opportunity to be here today to share our experience with you. And I'm glad that we've been through the initial stages up to now with the stream project. And I'm so happy that Alex made mention of like the asylum seekers. Our main objective, like the Voices Network, is to, like, we're experts by experience, in the sense that who feels it knows it, because we go through a lot of stress, fear, a lot, because you don't know, you're in a new environment. I'm so sorry, it's, the crowd is a bit, yeah, but I'll be fine. Yeah. So it's new to talk to the big crowd about and going back to it, we start by experience because we've been going through a lot of fear. You don't know who to talk to. You don't know whether you're doing the right thing, you know. So it's been a lot of stress, but I'm glad that we're in such awareness, because mainly when you talk about asylum seekers, our main problem is we have the language barrier. Like, English is not our first language for some of us, but so it's new, and to add up being in a new society or in a new environment, it really creates a lot of problems. So when you talk of gender violence, people go through it, but we have traditions, we have norms, we have cultures. Some of us feel too scared to open up. Some of us don't know where to go. Some of us don't know whether it's the right approach. But when we had the opportunity to be a part of this noble cause, we really welcomed it. It started, we helped by co-designing the program itself, and then we reviewed the draft, testing of the modules, and giving us some feedback and for putting it up in a workshop form. I think I've called it a bit. I'm so sorry. Yeah, in May we participated the first initial thing we participated in a group discussion with Ellie, who came over in Glasgow, and some of the women or the Voices Network. They given the opportunity to share ideas about gender violence, what we know about gender violence, and stuff like that. Because initially everybody thought that when you talk of gender violence, it's physical, not knowing it involves emotional, financial, and all this stuff. But the moment you talk of gender violence, to us was being physical, being beaten. So it was really good to be able to open up, give us the ideas that we thought, like when we share it to people who have been going through it, it's going to help at least in a way. We give Ellie the ideas, and we also help in creating, like, knowing where the laws governing gender violence, because back home you dare not talk to being a woman. The only thing that you need is your sideline. You're always at the back. You're not given an opportunity to say your views or to talk in public or to even give out ideas. So that is why, like, that is in us. We feel like we don't have a say, which is different when you come over here. So we did give Ellie the ideas that we have, and we thought if it's put in a workshop plan, it will work. So that was how we started initially. And also, at the end of it, Ellie did send us the draft plan for us to review, to see whether what we've been discussing in the input, whether everything has been on it, and to see how we want to go about it. And it followed by May when she came over. It was done in a workshop form. We did it in a group discussion, like exchanging ideas, what we thought will be really good if we put it in a workshop. And the greatest idea was giving us the opportunity, because we normally deal with each other. We know what exactly is going on, so we know the approach to take. Because stigma, when we talk of gender violence, we talk about stigmatization. That is why so many people don't feel it right to open up, which is really a great achievement for us, because we managed to penetrate through that. we managed to help people to open up, to talk to us, and which is really a plus for that. But then not I can't matter to keep that in the
So after that, in August, I think Alessandra come and run a workshop with us. So I will talk about my experience with this workshop, and after that, you will figure out why this kind of workshop is very important for migrant. Okay, so I will start with what was amazing about it. She started with it identified the terms, like what's mean violence abuse, what's kind, and it's new for us. It's the first time, it's domestic abuse can be emotional and financial and other kind. For us, it's just physical. So after that, she explained to us everything, our rights, the law, how we can manage and arrive to the real people who can help us, and how to, how do you say it in English? Never mind about language barriers, because it's important for all of us. After that, I have an idea about it, so I contact so many women about this. They can speak English, so I can explain to them, encourage them. And there's 2 or 3, they were here in London. They start to do their job, and they are now happy. But every one of them helped another woman. So one workshop helped me to help about 4 or 5 women. Those 5 or 4 women help another, and they will help another. I think you can see that after the workshop. So it's really very important, because that's really delivers the message, important message. You are not alone, and you can do it. You give an authentic and real example to those migrant women. They can do it. They just can do it. So I came before 2 days. I met 7 ladies here. They, through all of this, they were really happy. The kids was happy, and they always say we are example, and we always want other women to do that, because it's hard, but you can do it. That's the most important. So I think I don't talk about theory, it's different, the society, but I think it's practice, more practice. So workshop is very important. So I will conclude what it's new for me, the law. And the other thing, they talk about local sexual health clinic, and it was totally new for me. I advised so many women after that to go there. It was very comfortable place. The people was so kind and friendly, and it was really amazing. What that's okay. I think it's your turn to come back.
Yeah, it's just a conclusion of what I was saying, because the main objective was to be able to conquer, to be able to help people, to be able to read the minds of people, because it's very difficult when you're dealing with somebody who's been abused. So we now know the signs and symptoms of it, and know the ways in which to approach it, to either be able to help them to come up to people and explain what they're going through, and just to show them that they're not alone in this, because that's the main important thing. Because when you're into something, you need people, which is really, really important. And that is what they've been lacking, because they were scared. There are instances when, for instance, if your husband is the main, when you're in the asylum process, if he's the main benefactor, and you have the wife and the kids, so if that person is being domestically, like being abused, she feels scared. Like she doesn't know that she has the right also to apply for asylum on her own, which is a very big problem, because some of them don't know, and they don't know who to talk to. That's why, or that's where the problem lies. Because if they had been given the opportunity to talk to people, to open up, say what their problems are, then we'll be able to fight that. And also during the asylum process, it's a continuous, it's a continued process, because even whilst in the asylum process, you're being abused. Because for instance, somebody who is from, like, who suffered from a rape case, and you're at home and, for instance, like your housing officer comes up in like the early hours of the morning, not knocking, because he has access. He can open the doors at any time and stuff like that. So you can imagine that trauma, because he or she might be very, very scared, but they don't know that they have the right to say, look, this is now my property. You need to let me know that whenever you want to come here, just give me a ring that I become this. And there's a limit, or there's a time when you need to come here. So all these are happening, and where like people don't know whether it's right or it is their right for them to say no to that. So I'm really happy to be able to participate in such, and it's a work that is, it's a continued thingy. It doesn't stop here, you know, because as everyone knows, life is precious, and the only thing that doesn't have hope is the dead. So from now on, we'll be there fighting it, trying to talk to people, trying to, you know, break the barriers with the help of the experience that we have. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions for Mada Al-Safi or about the Voices Network on Know Your Rights?
Did the Voices Network, did you do any work with men as well, to try and shift their thinking?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe it's just two girls here because it's about us, but yeah, we have voices. At the beginning, I was talking with my friends, there is man voices network, then women's. It was two groups. Then we thought it's better to be one group. We are man and woman. There is man with us for like the band or that kind of thing, but we are just girls. Don't worry, there is man.
Yeah. I was going to say, also in terms of the Know Your Rights, when we were delivering around the country, one of the main things that the ladies were saying is like, you know, this is great, but you need to go and deliver this to men and boys. So that's almost our kind of next phase. Although we've now, finished with our funding for the project, we're hoping through the Red Cross and, looking for opportunities to continue to deliver these courses, these workshops, because probably out of everything we've done, they seem to have had the biggest impact. So the next phase for us is to really think harder about preventative work. So information and delivering these workshops to men and boys. So we are looking at doing that particularly as a first step through our refugee family reunion. So where we have, we're working with a sponsor in the UK, or many sponsors, we're kind of running these workshops alongside all the logistics of bringing families to the UK, because we've seen actually domestic abuse sadly is quite high with our refugee family reunion cases. It's quite frequent for a number of reasons. So through that, we're looking to hopefully integrate Know Your Rights into our program in the future.
Yeah. Yes.
Where does most of the cost around running the workshops come from? Is it, say, staff travel, or is it actually the workshops themselves?
Yeah, I think probably travel. I mean, we worked in all the preparations. It's every kind of did lots of meetings and prepared it. Once they're done, I mean, they're done now. So the idea is that we kind of hand those over to different organisations, and then people can just deliver them themselves. But yeah, in terms of costs, I think it's the usual for travel and refreshments. But all of the materials are complete. So we've kind of got like a package now with all the different materials that hopefully we can hand over to some of the organisations here today and others as well.
Yes.
I think just maybe architect that what the workshop will get. So our special service in Lambeth, for example, run one of the special themselves with their service users. Could you just have to sort of themselves?
Yeah, that was the idea, is to make our resources accessible so they can reach and have the greatest impact. So I think after today, we'll be looking at how we can make those accessible, whether they be on our website. There's some guidance as well for facilitators. And we always recommend that the workshops are delivered by someone with migrant or refugee background as well. So they're kind of co-delivered to make sure that it's relevant and the facilitator understands some of the barriers and issues to engaging in this type of workshop. But yeah, so yeah, we'll think about putting them on the website.
So how did you address those risks when delivering these workshops to women? Someone is in a situation of domestic violence, or similarly, if they haven't reached any point of disclosure. So how are these workshops being presented, and how did you sort of build trust and ensure that participation, keeping in mind the risk involved in terms of safety, but also in terms of just making people feel comfortable?
Sure. So risks around safety at the forefront of our minds at all times. So, following basic good practice, for example, not encouraging somebody just to up and leave an abusive relationship without a plan, etc. Making sure that practice ran through everything that we were doing. We made the decision to mainly deliver when we were testing them out within our existing women's support groups and kind of internally with the Red Cross. Because we're really fortunate in the Red Cross to have psychosocial support in place in most of our service areas. So, for example, I think when we were in Glasgow, psychosocial team, I don't know if you wanted to say a word about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so with the Voices Network anyway, we have psychosocial support integrated into our project, and that's open to the group. So it can be one-to-one sessions with our psychosocial practitioner. It can be reflective practice sessions as well, so that support is always there and available.
And did you have something similar to Know Your Rights in the Voices Network operating in the other key partner countries? Or were they more focused on training professionals?
They also did information workshops. They didn't take a co-production approach, and they didn't involve migrant women. So I think that's something that we were hopefully bringing to the partnership, is to take that approach as the most effective and best way of doing things. So yeah, all partners had to deliver those 3 outcomes around the information sessions. So hopefully again on the Swim Project website we can see reports on the impact of those information workshops.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a wide question. I just wanted to know, what do you mean by 10 women, and also what do you do to ensure that term's inclusive of different gender identities?
Yeah, sure. So at the suggestion of the women, we had a session on different gender identities and sexual orientations. It's really interesting. Of course, there's a lot of stigma and taboo in migrant communities. So that was one, and I should have put the sessions up, but I will make them available to you all to have a look at afterwards. So yeah, we engaged in that. That was one of the modules. And also talking about equalities and rights, and I think a lot of the participants didn't know that they had rights under kind of Equalities Act. So yeah, so that we thought was a really important part of the overall workshop plan.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I'll hand back over to Ellie.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll do that. Okay, so moving on just to kind of the second part, which is around that third aim around policy and work. The final aim of the project, something that we're just kind of finishing off now, is around developing kind of a set of minimum standards. At EU level, it was kind of a charter for the rights of women seeking asylum in Europe to be protected against gender-based violence. So the development process, we kind of identified the core themes. So some of the things that we've been talking about today around, survivor-centered approach, capacity building, referral mechanisms. Some of these key things that we want in place for services. So I think the audience for the minimum standards and the charter are kind of statutory services, but also any organisation working with and supporting people, particularly through the asylum process, although we made the decision in the UK context to broaden that out to all migrants, not just those that happen to be going through the asylum process. So we held a round table in Brussels with a number of organisations, including the European Network of Migrant Women and the European Network on FGM. So kind of EU level umbrella organisations to make sure that we had all that kind of representation and they were inclusive. And there's some pictures of us in Brussels, but very inspiring. So working in Brussels. But we developed kind of at EU level a charter, and I think the next steps for that are to engage at that level with the statutory services, but particularly focusing on the authorities and our partner agencies and those who are responsible for asylum reception. So it's a work in progress. In the UK context, we've been working on kind of adapting and developing that for the issues that present to us in the UK. So as I said, as we know, the asylum process is quite different here in the UK in that we don't have these vast reception centres. Actually, the people that often have the most face-to-face contact are going to be your housing officers and accommodation providers that they may have the least levels of awareness and skills as well. So having these kind of minimum approaches that are in place both through the asylum process, but also other statutory services such as healthcare, police, the justice system, to have a kind of uniform service standards. So my colleague Claire is going to join me. I'll let you introduce yourself. Claire is from our policy and advocacy team, just to talk through some of the standards and how we've developed, how we hope to apply them in the UK context. I'll sit here.
Yeah, thank you very much for that really warm welcome. As Ellie said, I'm Claire, I work in our policy research and advocacy team, covering our work on refugee support, restoring family links and anti-trafficking. But I come from an operational background in the Red Cross, so I used to manage our London Refugee Support Service, and before that I was a coordinator for our Women in Crisis Service, which was one of the first ones that was set up in 2002. And I think it's as a result of our, as Ellie said, as a result of our operational experience supporting people who are facing gender-based violence in the asylum system that we were involved in SWIM and that we were involved in developing this European level of minimum standards. And as Ellie mentioned more recently, I've been working with Ellie and the wider policy and advocacy team to build on this high-level work to think about what this would mean in the UK context, some of the changes we would need to see if some of these minimum standards are to be realised, and how we can support existing campaigns on gender-based violence. I'm going to talk about a few of the key standards that were agreed through the SWIM project, so particularly around safe disclosure, which Ellie mentioned earlier, and on referral mechanism and meeting immediate needs, and also multi-agency approach. But to kind of recap the key principles that the SWIM partners agreed that would run through all of these minimum standards and any approach and response to gender-based violence were that it should be non-discriminatory, as is set out in the Istanbul Convention, and also that it should be survivor-led and survivor-centred. And I think, in the UK, we've seen a lot of these principles in action. We heard from the Voices Network earlier about their amazing success in Scotland recently, but we've also seen through the Step Up Migrant Women campaign and all their work around the domestic abuse bill. We're very excited to see publication of later this afternoon and see whether a lot of those campaigning points around protection for migrant women have been taken into account. But also in the All Women Count campaign, where refugee and migrant women have been bringing the case to parliamentarians to respect basic principles of safety, liberty and dignity for all refugee and migrant women. And I think many of the minimum standards that are listed here will be very familiar to many of you. They've been really covered in detail by campaigns such as by Step Up Migrant Women or by Southall Black Sisters on their Protection for All campaign, and also in wider sector standards by specialist organisations like Women's Aid and IMCON. So I think, as Ellie said, the development work at SWIM and the way that we're using this in the UK is not an attempt to set out a new set of minimum standards. It's more just a way for us to be able to share our learning and to think through what steps we need to see in the UK if we're to realise basic protection for migrant women who are facing gender-based violence. So the first one I was going to look at is around safe disclosure. And by this, we were looking at addressing barriers for people with insecure immigration status that they face when reporting abuse and accessing public services. And advocating for access to life-saving services is a core part of the humanitarian work of the wider Red Cross, Red Crescent movement across 190 countries in the world, and it's really important in our work with people who are displaced. International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent
societies have been raising concerns that migrants around the world are increasingly facing barriers to accessing essential services that are indispensable to survival and basic dignity. So services that we were talking about earlier, like healthcare, legal protection, access to shelter, and basic needs like food. And the Federation has highlighted a range of factors around the world that prevent people accessing support, including outright exclusions in some countries, or the more indirect factors that Alex mentioned earlier around sort of fears of arrest, detention, and deportation, prohibitively high service costs, but also language barriers and some of the other barriers that the Voices Network was mentioning earlier. So you were talking about that. And in 2008, the Federation published a report called The New World Walled Order. Well, I always say it wrong. But that looks at how barriers to accessing basic services can turn migration into a humanitarian crisis. And I think that that's something which is really important in terms of looking at the support for people in the UK and barriers that they're facing for accessing basic services. And the Federation made the recommendation that states should establish firewalls between immigration enforcement and service providers, including in health services and justice mechanisms. And also that we should remove any requirements for mandatory reporting of people with insecure immigration status by service providers. And that these are key steps, they said, that can facilitate access to life-saving services. And I think safe disclosure and concerns about the way that threats of immigration enforcement can be used by perpetrators to perpetuate abuse and to control people is something which is constantly raised by our services and by people that we're supporting. And it's a really well-documented concern in the UK. Nearly 10 years ago, IMPAN published their report Vital Statistics, which showed that 92% of women responding had faced threats of deportation from perpetrators. So it's a well-known concern in the UK. And it's something which the Step Up Migrant Women campaign has been pretty strong in advocating around in terms of their engagement with the domestic abuse bill. I mean, the impact that we see is that data sharing in this way deters people from accessing basic public services, but also from reporting abuse and accessing support. And I think in our services, we've seen that this data sharing can have a much wider impact, but even services which don't share data in this way and do respect confidentiality, there's still that threat and the perception of someone potentially sharing their information with immigration enforcement. And I think that shows you that, you know, as so many organizations by and for migrant women have said, we need public services to see people survivors first, and to ensure people can access services safely, and you know, are supported when reporting abuse. And I think this really relates to all the work that we're doing around routes to information and accessing support, because as we've heard, you know, so powerfully this morning, there is still an ongoing lack of basic information for women seeking asylum and migrant women around things such as equalities legislation, local authority support, sexual and reproductive health, and also wider legal protections. And I think it really highlights the importance of taking every opportunity to make sure that someone has the information they need to make informed choices. And so much of the work through the Know Your Rights campaign, going to be a campaign, but through those workshops has been so important in meeting that standard around information on rights and routes to support. So safe disclosure, I'd say, you know, has been one of the areas that we've been thinking the most about and thinking about how we can support existing campaigns around that. And then also briefly to speak about some of the standards around meeting immediate material needs and meeting health needs. I think, as Ellie explained, a lot of these standards were developed in a situation where someone would be looking at reception conditions in Europe, so that's why it's so focused on immediate needs. That's not to say that we don't need to look at longer term needs. I think that's just to put those standards in context. But as you heard earlier, as an organisation, we support around 36,000 people a year going through the asylum process, and about half of the people we support are accessing destitution services. So as many of us here know, many people in the asylum system and migrating can face street homelessness, can be reliant on friends or someone they met on the bus for a place to sleep. And new research just out earlier last month by Women Refugee Women showed us the impact of destitution in the asylum system and the links between destitution and exploitation and abuse. And I think it's something which our services and the people we work with are constantly raising, that we see people forced into situations where they're forced to stay with an abusive partner, or into situations of domestic servitude or sexual exploitation just when they're looking for somewhere to sleep and to meet their basic living needs. And I think whilst destitution has been shown to have a really clear link to exploitation, there are also wider barriers facing people in the asylum system when migrating, because as we know, many people don't have the right to work, and they often don't have recourse to public funds, which means they can't access welfare benefits or apply for housing support from their local authority. This also means that many people face barriers to accessing refuge spaces by specialist organisations, but so many organisations are reliant on public funds to fund the refuge space. And so that means that there are very few no recourse to public fund spaces available, and that lack of recourse to public funds means that people aren't able to access specialist support. And we've also seen the impact of the reduction in specialist BAME, domestic violence services, all of which create additional barriers to accessing appropriate specialist support for migrant women. And I think a lot of organisations by and for migrant women have been thinking, how do we resolve this? You know, what is the change that we need to see? And one of the key calls from the sector has been around expanding the immigration laws around domestic violence and looking at the destitute domestic violence concession, which is currently only available to a very small group of people who arrived on spousal visas or are partners of settled people in the UK. So looking at, could we expand that so that it could apply to all migrant women and have routes for support for more people. And I think the importance of having stable and secure immigration status and recourse to public funds is something that we've been thinking a lot about and learning from in our support, longer term support for survivors of trafficking. And in 2019, we published a new report, which we put some copies outside, so please do pick one up, but it's called Hope for the Future. And it was based on a pilot project that we were carrying out along with Ashiana and Kestia. And the pilot project supported 70 women and men who had been identified as survivors of trafficking, but whose statutory support through the National Referral Mechanism for Survivors of Trafficking had come to an end. And one of the main conclusions of this research was how important it is to create an automatic entitlement to leave to remain for people leaving the National Referral Mechanism with a positive conclusive grounds decision. And I think this is the reason for that is that at present someone can receive a letter recognising that they are a victim of trafficking, but at the same time a letter asking them to, saying that they've got no leave to remain and asking them to make plans to leave the UK. And I think what our research found is that the lack of secure immigration status leaves people in a situation of limbo, and that uncertainty can really impede recovery. But in a more immediate way, in a way that we've been talking about today, it also leaves them at risk of re-exploitation and sexual violence because they're not able to meet their immediate accommodation needs, mental health support or financial support, or to start rebuilding their lives through education and work. And in our services, we've seen, pretty sadly, many women who've left the National Referral Mechanism with recognition that they are a survivor of trafficking and yet have had no leave to remain, no recourse to public funds, have found themselves destitute and homeless, and have been subjected to repeated sexual violence and re-exploitation. I think this really shows how the lack of protection in the immigration system at the moment leaves people vulnerable to abuse and re-exploitation. That's something that we've been really thinking through how we can address and how we can use our resources to support existing campaigns around. And finally, I was going to look, the lamp dimming is hiding it, but I was going to look at a multi-agency approach, and then also briefly about referral mechanisms and some of the thinking we've been doing around that. And I think many of you here will be very familiar with the importance of multi-agency support, and it's that recognition that no single sector or organisation can address all the elements that are needed in a response to gender-based violence, and that as agencies we need to work together to make sure that we place the needs of survivors at the centre of our work, and that we are sharing information in a way that respects confidentiality. And on a policy level, the UK has signed up to the UN's Global Compact on Safe and Orderly Migration, which explicitly sets out that states need to commit to developing gender-responsive migration policies. And it sets out that states need to look to address the particular needs and vulnerabilities of migrant women, including by providing assistance, healthcare, psychological and other counselling services, as well as access to justice, effective remedies, especially in cases of sexual and gender-based violence, abuse and exploitation. All of which would require a really clear referral mechanism and a multi-agency approach. And I think this is something that as a primarily crisis-based organisation we're really keenly aware of, because we often see people who might not meet the criteria for accessing a specific service, or might be trying to navigate multiple different systems at the same time, so the asylum system and the national referral mechanism, and are then affected by gaps between those systems that don't speak to each other. And again, returning to some of the research that we have been doing around longer-term support for survivors of trafficking, one of the important parts of that pilot project that Ashley and Hestia was to look at piloting a multi-agency, a holistic care pathway for people leaving the national referral mechanism. And it was particularly looking at how that could reduce women's vulnerability to gender-based violence. And the outcome scores for people leaving the pilot project showed that this holistic multi-agency care pathway was really successful in reducing women's vulnerability to gender-based violence, and ensuring that they were able to take steps to start rebuilding their lives and towards recovery. And I think I'm sure so many people can think of brilliant examples of multi-agency working where you've seen women first approach a service in a situation that no human being should ever experience, but then through working together through multiple different agencies, we see a situation where someone's able to focus on their strengths and not on their vulnerabilities, and to rebuild their lives. And when I was looking at the Vimeo Bakery earlier, the London service will know we referred so many people to the Vimeo Bakery, and it was amazing to see so many. There's someone I can think of who right now is thinking about opening her own business on the back of becoming an apprentice baker at the Vimeo Bakery, but that wouldn't have happened if all organisations working with her hadn't placed her needs at the centre and hadn't looked at her strengths and the things that she wanted to do with her lives. But as we've seen, there are so many barriers in place for that happening at the moment, and so much that needs to change. I could talk about her phrases. I'm going to flip back on my notes so that I don't. So I think, in terms of our next steps, we're looking at what learning we can take from SWIM, learning from our operational experiences, working with the Voices Network to really think about what our policy and advocacy responses should be as an organisation, and how we can work with all of you in the room to ensure that people can access services without discrimination, and that we can work together to prevent gender-based violence. And I think what's really clear is that if we are to achieve gender responsive migration policies, there is so much that needs to change. People are able to access life-saving services regardless of their immigration status and without discrimination. So I guess ending saying there's so much need to do, but with a real kind of commitment from us to work with all of you to make sure that we can lend our resources to support existing campaigns around ending gender violence.
Thank you so much, Claire. So that's kind of the end of hearing from us, but we wanted to open it up to any more kind of questions or comments, particularly around next steps. But yeah, over to you guys. Any thoughts?
I just had a question regarding, as you said, multi-agency working is so crucial. But also, as you said, data and information sharing can deter disclosures. So how do you ensure that survivors and victims feel comfortable enough to come out and disclose experiences, whilst ensuring that safeguarding is in their multi-agency work promoted?
I think one of the things in terms of safe disclosure, one of the real difficulties that a lot of voluntary sector organisations have in working with statutory agencies like local authorities is that fear of immigration enforcement and the way that data will be shared. So it's not being shared for the purpose of safeguarding the person you're supporting or of meeting their needs. It's for another purpose, which I think is particularly difficult for people with insecure immigration status, and it's something which so many other people don't have to think about when accessing services. So I think that's one of the key the key standards about safe disclosure is knowing how that information will be used, and knowing that someone will respect your right to confidentiality. But also, I think, Ellie will be talking a lot more about this, but in terms of never sharing information without speaking to someone, without someone's consent. And we were talking about having the information to make informed decisions on your rights and options. And I think for so many people, there's a lack of information about what they are entitled to, about what their options are, for them to make their own decision about accessing those services. So those would be key.
Definitely. And we've got some members of our London team from operations. I don't know if you wanted to add to any of that, just from your practice.
I'm a big practice coordinator for the London. I think building on that, that's where the really multi-agency approach consideration for building. Because I guess what we do is we work a lot with trying to work with statutory and voluntary sector organisations to build their relationships and to kind of embed those training things in our learning, what we know and what people need, so that then actually you're reducing those barriers to access from the start. And I think it's been really clear with women, the women that I'm working with at the outset. But I think that's where multi-agency has to be more than just referrals, it has to be about partnership and relationship building. And I think that's the only thing I'd kind of add to that, which is where the wider role of building capacity within the external agencies comes in.
Maybe as an example, maybe you can comment about what the overall experience is, like what that is as an example of very effective partnership and communication with local authorities and knowing what they are doing, when we're definitely on that. I guess if we start with the trial, which expand a bit more on that, their kind of part of the practice of operational group, we see this kind of strategic partnerships that works to uphold those good practice standards and making it so where in London, kind of the tri-boroughs are really working very strategically at implementing best practice for the women that we're working with and work with communities, work with the statutory and voluntary sector, and with women themselves realising that there has to be that holistic approach and multi-agency working as well. And I guess seeing the impact of that really
But just to understand together, so a lot of the work we do is around coordinated community response, so around promoting best practice within professional activities and communities as well. Some are easier to reach than others, but absolutely working in partnership with a lot of agencies. I think that's what I'm doing now. Having different voices in the room is really
maybe one thing about data sharing that we really don't want. One example is more like having immigration enforcement embedded in the social services department, for instance. This is something that should not happen at all, because these would deter women accessing social services, support linked situation of violence with children and having unsecure status, even though they would have rights after that under Section 17. So this would be something in terms of the data sharing shouldn't really be there.
I think that from Marex as well, just to so we coordinate by Marex, and we've had issues around home office on in terms of Marex, and that's something that we obviously don't agree to happen, because actually we don't want the home office being in on cases of women and insecure immigration status and information. We agree to, but it's something we need to kind of have on the radar really across areas.
A newer practice.
Just for questions.
That's really concerning. Obviously, we're talking about barriers at the beginning, having enforcement embedded in the support systems that are there to keep facility.
Can I ask what kind of household servants have received some food cuts from other organisations?
Yeah, I mean, you can answer that as well, Andy, because we're working together on some of that. So in terms of it externally, we've mainly reached out to accommodation providers within the asylum reception system, because with the capacity we had, we were reaching those first. So we've got a plan to continue engaging as mainly around kind of those housing officer level professionals, because they are the ones going into the accommodation, having that contact. So I think that's gone down quite well. I mean, interestingly, so we've been working with ASAP and Refugee Council on the Home Office domestic abuse guidance, which was brought out last July, and offers provision for people eligible or on asylum support to get access to support, potentially refuge place. So really welcome development. But I mean, one thing we have found is that the people on the ground who should be making these referrals just don't know about it. There's a really low level of awareness. So we certainly found that with the accommodation providers that we've reached out to, they just didn't even know that it existed. It's complete news to them, which again is a bit of a concern, because this is the safety net, the referral mechanism for people within the asylum support system. So so I know that we've been doing some work about how we can monitor the rollout of that as well. So yeah, I think it has been welcoming of kind of what we're saying and the messages, and of course we're providing free training, which people don't say no to. So I think that was our way in as well. So we haven't funded, we don't anymore, so we need to think about that. But yeah, it was an interesting opportunity to also see the level of knowledge of what information is actually coming down to those people who can use some of these referral mechanisms. And I don't know, did you want to say a word on what you're doing in terms of that domestic abuse guidance as well?
My name is Matilda. I work at ASAP, which is Asylum Support Project. I'm a women team advisor there. I'm working with Ellie and her Andy to monitor the implementation of the premises new domestic abuse guidance, which came out in the summer. We have a meeting with the Home Office in the next month or so to discuss the implementation of it. I'm actively monitoring cases. So if you have a case of an asylum-seeking woman who's affected by DA, who's trying to access a refuge, do get in touch with me, and I can try and support you through assessing eligibility. I think
No, I mean, just add, so we know there have been some cases where it's worked well, but it feels like that's more by accident than by design. And the general feeling we get is it's failing, and there's multiple failure points. It's like maybe because microphone staff aren't aware of the guidance, or accommodation providers are, or even worse, Home Office safeguarding officers aren't fully aware. So that's why we're wanting to meet with a senior official over the next month to kind of look at the first 6 months of implementation. What can we put in place going forward to address the situation.
And that'd be really interesting to hear from kind of your work with Voices as well, whether people who could access this support even know it's available to them. I think that's one of the really big problems that you were highlighting, especially Safi, around just like knowing what options you've got. And I don't know how much work there's been done within the Home Office asylum support estate to say this isn't, this is something which is a support option for people who are facing abuse.
Yes, but just it's curiosity, because I met some people who through all this. After everything finished, there is big finance problem, because women can work like men now in car wash or restaurant. They all suffer from money issue because it's hard with kids, and one of them in safe accommodation, she's still in danger. So they was asking me what we can do. I know the problem is we don't know how to access. I told them, Syrian people are trying to cook in kitchen. So I told them, I think there is some people who help you to start a cooking work or something. But even me, I don't know how to, because it's London, I don't live here. So if there is some support in this kind, because they told me they arrived to this step, then they let them alone. They say you get your paper again, you have your accommodation safe or normal, and they let them. And they have really problem with money because it's just girls, it's not like men, they can. So if there is some kind of, I advise you to let them know this kind of job, and even volunteer job, they say we want to work but we don't know how or where or with who.
I think that's it. We very much focus on those immediate needs, and as Beth said, as the Red Cross, we've always been around crisis and crisis response. And actually, we need to think more long term. We need to think particularly, talking about gender-based violence, we need to be thinking about prevention work much earlier on. What can means to support yourself is an essential part of that. We don't, I mean, as a Red Cross, we don't provide any specific programs around that. You know, we would be kind of linking people in with local services. So maybe that's one part of the employability project we've got coming up. But yeah, it's a good point to pick up on that.
I was just going to add service, if that's useful. Refugee Council have a big on service.
Yeah, so we have a service that helps people who have got refugee status, their kind of immediate needs, and also in terms of like connecting to communities and into accessing employment. So it's based on our strategy office mostly. So you can contact us or the details on our website. But there are other organisations as well, so if you're in a different department, then there will be perhaps more, another organisation might be close to. So,
I think that's really good for us also to think about this looking at immediate needs, and that is not speaking to, you know, the longer term needs, but particularly in the future and some of the research we've been doing about longer term recovery for survivors of trafficking. It is looking at those pathways for much longer term support to, you know, work and education.
I think a really sort of big issue now is because people are waiting much longer for decisions on their case. And a lot of the services are aimed at people who have got a decision, but you know, what happens if you're waiting? You know, you're at risk of becoming more isolated. Any skills you might have, so I think we all probably need to focus a bit more on those people who are in the system.
Is there any program of gender-based violence within detention centres in the UK as part of this project?
Not as part of this project, because it was focusing on reception rather than detention. And it's something we actually discussed at the beginning, but I think with the capacity we had, like it's just me basically, to broaden the focus out to looking at detention as well. But I think others have done that. So I think, am I right, that with refugee women have, do you know a bit more about that from policy angle?
I'm sure lots of them really know a lot about it than me. I think women, refugee women, hibiscus, I know there's been so much work around this from the sector. I think that would be something, an area where we'd be looking to support existing campaigns and look at other people's expertise in this area, because as an organisation, we don't generally provide services in detention centres, or where we do, it's very specific around family tracing.
There's a group of NGOs who meet at the Home Office every 3 months to talk specifically about detention issues and sort of look at things like the adult risk policy. And that would be probably the best mechanism to feed any concerns or issues into.
I guess more broadly, one thing we have been trying to do through this project is to really make those links from, you know, GBV being a reason that somebody might flee their country, they might experience it on the kind of dangerous routes as well to the UK, but then the very, you know, the asylum process as well does not recognise that and does not offer that protection that they need, particularly as survivors of gender-based violence. So people, as we heard often, as you know, will end up destitute and more vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, or end up in detention, where again, their needs as survivors of gender-based violence are not recognised. So trying to really match all of that up, and for us as well, make the link between our work internationally on this issue and our work within the UK asylum process as well, to really to make those links. Any further questions or comments? Okay. Well, just leaves me to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending. We've got a few minutes, so do feel free to stay, have a chat, do some networking, carry on eating pastries if you'd like to. So we've got quite a few take on with you. But it'd be great to continue to link in with all of you and connect. I think we've now got a gender-based violence page on our website, which is very exciting after 2 years. So we're going to have to put some information on there about how you can kind of continue to connect with the Red Cross around these issues, both operationally but also on a policy level. So yeah, please, stay connected. And thank you.